On this episode of the Haunted Objects Podcast.
I want to touch that egg.
I do too.
Of John Lennon's egg,
Do you
alien
think?
egg.
Do you think Uri would let us touch that egg?
Nope.
I'm gonna touch that egg. I'm gonna touch that egg. I want to touch that fucking egg.
From deep inside the mysterious archives of the Newkirk Museum of the Paranormal, it's the Haunted Objects Podcast.
Dana, have you ever experienced that thing where you have an item and you lose track of it and it appears at a random time later in a place that you definitely couldn't have put it?
Yes. I have two instances of this. The first one is a tarot deck that I keep a piece of moldavite in. And moldavite, for those who don't know, is a really popular Tektite. It is pretty expensive and small.
What the is a Tektite?
It is a piece of glass.
Oh.
So a meteor crashed on a beach, millions of years ago, and it melted the sand and it created this green glass. And it's really popular on TikTok. A lot of people will use it. And so I have a really small piece of it that I keep in a specific tarot deck, and it moved from one box tarot deck to another.
Whoa.
So there's that. And then I also have had tarot decks, or specifically the Thoth deck that I'm learning. Cards will move on their own, and I keep them in order because I'm trying to learn this system. And so I don't ever give myself readings with it or anything, but they just appear in different spots.
Pretty interesting that those are both things that you use in your practice.
Yeah, and they're both tarot related, which is kind of
disappearing.
Yeah,
and reappearing.
It's very weird.
What about you, Karl?
I know that I've had those kind of moments where, something goes missing in the house and everyone's searching for it. And a week later, you find it like in the basement on like the treadmill or something.
Yeah.
I know I've had those sort of moments before. But one of the weirder kind of like things that appeared that shouldn't be there moments for me, it was probably in high school. We were sitting on the couch Friday night watching TV with the family, and a drop of water fell from the ceiling and hit me in the arm or the leg, touched it. It was a little wet spot like water. And, you look up and it's like a normal fine ceiling. There was no mark on it. There was no leak, like zero idea where this water drop could have possibly come from.
Just came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Weird.
I had almost the same thing happen to me, but yours sounds better because mine was like a viscous fluid, like snot.
That's so weird. I
and
remember
it
when
landed
that
on
happened.
my arm.
Yeah.
This was post Hellier, like
Yeah.
mid season 2 kind of timeline too. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but that was disgusting.
Yeah, and it was in your office.
It's in my office.
And same thing, like nothing weird about the ceiling. Like you weren't.
Yeah.
Like, it's just
Wasn't
very
a
weird.
rainstorm or something.
No. And I looked up to see if there was anything on the ceiling. Nothing on the ceiling, but this was like snot.
Yeah, it was like
Ectoplasm. My Ghostbusters dreams were coming true.
Ghostbusters, what do you want?
He slimed you.
He did. I got slimed.
You did get slimed.
Today we're talking about that exact phenomenon. You might not know that it has an actual name. This is something that has existed at least since the 1800s, but even if you're invested in the paranormal, you might not know the name of this. It's called an Apport. And today we're talking about arguably the very beginning of the Newkirk Museum of the Paranormal. The first item that I ever collected was a piece of coal that apported into my forehead during a ghost hunt in a haunted cemetery.
In the long and storied history of parapsychology, few mysteries rival that of apportations, the sudden and inexplicable appearance of ordinary objects. For centuries, small everyday items have been reported to manifest out of nowhere during moments of high strangeness, defying the laws of physics and challenging our very perceptions of reality. In the early 2000s, one such apportation event occurred in a long-forgotten mining cemetery high atop a mountain in rural Pennsylvania. It was there, during a late-night search for spirits, that a group of curious teens found themselves beneath an inexplicable rain of stones which fell from the empty moonlit sky. Where do these apports originate? And how can they elude the constraints of space and time? Is apportation a spiritualist parlor trick? a product of extrasensory powers? Or are these mysterious objects a genuine manifestation of the supernatural? Perhaps the answers can be found in an untold tale from Barclay Mountain Cemetery.
So in order to tell this story, which is going to be the bulk of today's episode, probably, arguably, my best ghost story,
Yeah.
it needs a little bit of setup.
So wait, are you telling people, get your tea?
Yep,
It's a little story time.
it is story time.
Get your cozies on.
Mm-hmm.
Not if you're driving. Don't do that. But you're gonna take us on a little journey.
I'm going to take you on a journey. It's going to have a few detours. We're going to learn some stuff, but I promise that the end of this ghost story is a banger.
It's a good one.
To set this up, we have to go back to about 2000, the year 2000.
Yeah.
My friends and I, just a year or two earlier, had formed our ghost hunting team, Ghost Hunters Incorporated.
Mm-hmm. Were you incorporated?
No, we didn't even know what that word meant.
Just sounded cool.
It sounded cool.
Yeah.
So we, as Ghost Hunters Incorporated, we're sneaking out. We used to do this thing where we would have sleepovers, and we'd all go to each other's houses for sleepovers, so nobody really knew where we were. And then we would hide in a field. Usually we were hanging out at our friend Matt's house. We would go hide in the field at like midnight after all of our parents had gone to bed, and we'd wait for Jason Gowan to flash his headlights 2 or 3 times, and then you just see all of these teens pop up out of the field and go running towards the car. Because Jason was a real man. He was a little older. And then we would go out and we would, we can call it ghost hunting, but it was really just going out trying to get scared, hanging out in abandoned cemeteries and abandoned houses and stuff like that. Well, we found a place once that still to this day has provided me with some of the most stunning experiences I've ever had.
Yeah.
It's a place nestled away in the mountains in the middle of Bradford County, nothing around for miles. It's the only thing that happens up there is there's like hunting cabins and stuff. But it's a place called Barclay Mountain. Barclay Mountain used to be, back in the 1800s, a huge coal mining operation. There were all these trains that went up to Barclay Mountain they got washed away in the early 1900s. The only thing that exists, they used to have saloons, they used to have hotels, there were churches. It's just now the only thing that exists are some old abandoned mines, and then this cemetery, this old mining cemetery.
So you're saying like at one point in time it was a thriving community.
It was huge.
There were lots of people living there.
Yeah.
There was lots of settlements. It was just like a very populated, dense area.
Yeah, it was founded officially in 1867. It was gone 35 years later.
Wow.
Didn't even last till the 1900s.
Wow.
And it, I think at the peak, they say there could have been around 3,000 people that were there.
It's hard to imagine that there were that many people living there.
I know, right? You've been there.
Then you walk, through the area and you're like, oh, wait a minute. But like, it's hard to imagine that there would be that many people living up there because it's not easy living up there. Like you're on a mountain.
It's hard to get to. The roads aren't even paved to get to it. That was the other thing. A bunch of teenagers in really shitty cars should not have been going up to this place. We tried to go up there in the winter.
No.
One time.
That's a bad idea.
We got stuck. We had to hike up to the cemetery to get to the cemetery.
Yeah.
We loved this place.
Yes.
It was like our super secret ghost hunting spot that was amazing. To describe this place, it was like something out of a Hollywood movie because it's up on the top of this mountain. It was overgrown. You couldn't even see half the headstones. There was just a single 1-lane dirt road that you had to take, like half a mile that got down to where this was. It was a dead end. Old sign that had been nothing was in a good state. Everything was in a state of disrepair. And there was the canopy of trees opens up in the middle. So if you were there on like a full moon, the whole place was lit up, and it was just high enough that the fog would hang right down by about your waist.
Yeah.
So it looked like a movie set. It was scary as hell, especially when you're like 15, 16 years old. Terrifying. This place became the site of so many of our stories. We've experienced people getting pushed in that place, getting tapped. We used to hear the sound of a pickaxe just ringing through the night. like somebody was mining in a mine.
And I think that the important detail to mention also is that now, today, no one really lives up there. There's like a few hunting cabins.
There's some hunting cabins up there.
When you're up there, you're alone for miles and miles and miles and miles. So it is incredibly isolated.
As kids, we believed that the reason the town didn't exist anymore is because it was wiped out by a plague. The cemetery is mostly children. That's the thing. It's tons and tons of kids.
There's a lot of kids there.
But the truth of the matter is really that they ran out of coal.
Yeah.
They ran out of coal. They tapped the place out, which is kind of funny because the same sort of thing is happening to my hometown right now, where natural gas companies have come in, tapped it all out, and then left. And so there's nobody moving to my town. There's nobody moving out there. It's kind of dying.
Yeah, they're just sort of having to figure out what to do next.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
One night, we'd been there a few times. We decided, let's take the whole team. And by the whole team, Ghost Hunters Inc. had probably 20 people in it.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Depending on who was available.
Just a lot of teens, a lot of youths.
A lot of youths.
Rural youths driving around looking for things to get into.
We all met at the Dandy Mini-Mart downtown. It was the only, I say downtown, there's one stoplight in the town that I grew up in. There's no one there. We met at the one 24-hour gas station, and we piled into two cars. We piled into my friend Mick Colada's, and then half of us piled into our friend Bo Garrison's. I think he was driving a Neon.
So what year would this have been?
This was 2001.
Okay.
This was summer 2001,
All
late
right.
summer. I don't even know if this might have been one of our last hurrahs before we went back to high school.
That makes sense.
We all meet up. We grab all of our Slim Jims and our Mountain Dews, and we had a ton. For some reason, we went through this phase where we carried a ton of weaponry with us.
Yes, you did. I've seen photos of. You also carried a curtain rod, and I think Nick Faust had a Civil
War sword.
Jason Gowan had a crossbow, possibly.
He had
or
a
you
crossbow.
Had a crossbow.
In shop class, what we used to do is we used to make crossbow darts that were like wooden stakes, because we started ghost hunting just because we were LARPing as vampire hunters.
Yes. Yeah.
That's where that all came from.
It is incredible that not one of you was lost your eye in a crossbow accident.
Oh, very close. Very, very close. I mean, I watched the crossbow go off and shoot right past Nick Faust's head.
Yeah. Nick should have definitely lost an eye. For sure.
So we all
Shout out Nick Faust.
Shout out Nick Faust. We're glad you're still alive.
Yeah, we're glad you're alive, Nick Faust.
But we had torches, it is insane. BB guns, just two cars packed to the hilt with teenagers, sugared up on Mountain Dew, holding medieval weaponry.
Here's the thing, though, and I'm not going to give any spoilers because you're telling this story, but it probably is good that you had those things. When you consider this story that you're about to hear,
it is.
It's probably good that you were all protected with medieval weaponry.
It is. It was about a 45-minute drive for us to get from my town of Troy up the mountain, up to Barclay Mountain.
Yeah.
So we are on our way up there. We're psyching ourselves up. We used to listen to Art Bell.
Yeah, what were you listening to?
We would listen to Art Bell. Sometimes we would listen to I mean, we were all into Rammstein back then. So we were listening to that, thinking we're super badass.
Yeah, you got your weapons.
So we're driving up this mountain, and we get to the turnoff where you turn off down the single lane dirt road to get to this place.
And so this was at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Middle of the night, 1 in the morning.
Yeah. Bunch of kids all jacked up on sugar and Mountain Dews.
We get about
Rammstein.
We get about halfway down that single lane road. And these headlights flip on.
That is my biggest nightmare.
And you need to know, this is middle of the week.
Yeah.
We've never seen anyone else up there, even during the day.
I was going to ask. So you had been up there many times, and you'd never seen another person.
No, because we would go up there, even around the area. We'd go looking for the abandoned mine shafts because we wanted to go into the mines and see what was in there.
Yeah.
I mean, we were everywhere, and we never, ever run into anybody up there, at least back then.
Yeah. And you did grow up in a pretty rural place. It's a very small town. It's
more cows than people.
Yeah, very, very kind of rural area.
Those lights flip on. And we're all like, what the what's somebody doing up here?
Yeah. It's never good when the headlights just flip on out of nowhere.
We thought, well, maybe somebody came up here to go parking.
Yeah.
Because we used to go, like, we'd go look for Parkers, and we
Parkers, can you explain, because you sound like you're 80, what that means?
It's just kids fooling around in the cars at night.
People doing it in their cars. Yeah.
We had like a gorilla suit, and we would scare people. So we just thought, like, okay, well, let's get the gorilla suit out. But
this is all true also because the other thing is Greg obsessively filmed his entire life. And so there's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of JHI's antics in Troy, Pennsylvania.
So we're sitting there on our walkie-talkies talking to each other like, what do we do? I guess we just wait. So we just sat there. And there must have been 5 minutes that went by where it's just us staring at these headlights, these headlights staring at us.
Yeah. Everybody's going like, what's happening now? Like, what's going to happen?
And then the headlights start coming towards us, and we pull over as far as we can without going into the ditch too bad where we couldn't get out.
Yeah.
And this truck starts creeping towards us very, very slowly. I mean, it was so close because that road is so small.
Yeah.
Real close to us. And this guy in the truck.
Could you see him?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Glaring at us. Like he's sizing us all up.
Yeah.
But there's 2 carloads of kids holding weapons.
Yeah.
And he just kind of, keeps on going, and then he's gone. And we all looked at each other like, that was fucking weird. There's just a single guy. There wasn't anybody else in the truck.
So he was just by himself at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Just sitting at this cemetery, this abandoned cemetery in the middle of nowhere.
During the week.
That's
some shady vibes.
Right?
Yeah,
so we're like, okay,
shady vibes.
I don't know what to make about that, but whatever.
Yeah.
The whole time our friend Nick wanted us to go and explore this other area that was kind of across from the cemetery entrance.
Yeah.
But we're all like, you're an idiot, Nick. There's nothing down there. That's just a trail. That doesn't go anywhere.
The bodies are buried over here, you dumbass.
That's exactly it.
What are you doing?
Yeah. The spooky stuff is over here.
Yeah.
Because at the time, you're like, oh, ghosts, they hang out in a cemetery, which doesn't make
they're...
any fucking sense to you now,
You're like, ghosts obviously want to stay with their bodies. Why
exactly.
would we want to Why wouldn't we want to watch our physical bodies decay?
Just rot.
That sounds kind of fun, actually.
So we're in the cemetery, and then all of a sudden, we start to feel like these, like we're getting hit with I don't know. I guess we originally thought, oh, these are like acorns or something falling from the trees.
Yeah, because it's true. When you're in the cemetery, like you described, there are trees. They're so old and they're huge and they're kind of interwoven throughout the headstones. So you really do get like very little sky, except when you're right in the middle, because that canopy kind of parts a little bit. So yeah, it would make sense that you'd think like acorns, or like if it was late summer, I mean, just anything kind of falling from trees. Plus you're up on a mountain, it's really windy usually, so that makes total sense.
Yeah, so we're like, oh, well, it must be acorns or something, because we can't see what it is. It's the middle of the night. And eventually one of them just smacks me in my head.
Yeah.
And I see it go click, it hits me in the head, and then I watch it fall, and I reach down and I pick it up, and it's a piece of coal.
Yeah.
Technically shale.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's weird. So I put it in my pocket, and I didn't really think much else of it.
Yeah.
We have a great ghost hunt. We got a bunch of EVPs. We're psyched. We had a great spooky night, which is the only thing we were looking for.
Yeah.
We're just kids out looking for a spooky thrill.
Yeah.
And then we go home. A few days later, the newspaper posts an article about a guy pulled over at a local gas station.
Yeah.
And the police take him in because...
Was it the Dandy?
It was the Dandy.
He went to the 24 hours.
I believe it was the Dandy.
Possibly.
I have the newspaper article.
Yeah, I can read it.
This isn't the original one. This is one that came after this guy was sentenced.
Yeah, do you want me to read this?
Read this newspaper article.
So this is from 2001.
Yep.
It's called Bradford County Man Charged. Towanda, PA, police have charged a Bradford County man in the execution-style killing of his neighbor, whose body was found dumped in the woods more than a week after he disappeared. Frederick Rowland House Jr., 41, of West Burlington Township, was charged with homicide and related charges, adding to theft and other charges lodged against him in August when he was accused of stealing and driving the pickup truck of his missing neighbor, Edward William Bond Jr. Bond was last seen alive on August 8th after an extensive search by local volunteers, game commissions official, and police. His corpse was found on Barclay Mountain in Franklin Township.
We were face to face with that motherfucker after he dumped the body.
Yeah,
we were there at the same time.
Yeah, he was 100% going, can I kill all these kids?
Oh, 100%.
Like, he was,
there were too many of us.
Yeah, and you also had flails and swords and stuff.
Oh, yeah. And we couldn't hide him because, like, Bill's there with like a big axe in his hand that he'd like stolen from his parents' shed.
Yeah.
So this guy probably just decided, well, there's too many of them. I hope nothing happens.
Yeah.
And that trail that Nick wanted us to go down had that guy's body, Ed Bond's body, right there.
So he had killed his neighbor, loaded him up in the truck.
I think it was over a four-wheeler. It was over a four-wheeler, and I think he killed his neighbor, or this guy killed Ed, and then was driving his truck around.
Oh, so it was his truck that he was driving.
And the rumor always was that the police thought it was suspicious because there was blood dripping out of the truck bed.
Allegedly.
And then when they ran the plates,
it
wasn't his. Wow. And that's what kind of caused this whole thing.
Right.
Do you know how, like, we wouldn't be sitting here right now if me and my friends had found that body?
Nope. Nope.
Because we would have had to tell our parents.
Yeah, Lori Faust never would have let Nick out again.
She barely let him go as it was. We had to lie to our parents.
Shout out Lori Faust.
I mean, that would have been it. The end of my ghost hunting career, done. We wouldn't be sitting here.
Nope.
I'd be an investment banker or something somewhere.
Yeah, it would be, you'd all would have needed boatloads of therapy. I can't even imagine how traumatized.
Because I think he shot him a bunch of times too, so it was probably not a great sight.
The key, or what you're trying to say here, is that we should never follow Nick's intuition.
Are you in possession of a haunted object? An antique spiritualist tool? Wreckage from a crashed UFO? The Newkirk Museum of the Paranormal wants to add it to their archives. Whether your strange item is causing you paranormal problems or is simply a supernaturally significant relic worthy of curation, we want to hear from you. For more information on our acquisition process, visit paramuseum.com.
So let's talk about Apports
as
we continue down this journey, because this will start to make more sense as we go. There's more to that story.
So we're going to get
if you can
more.
believe it. The dictionary definition of what an Apport is the production of objects by apparently supernatural means at a spiritualist seance.
Okay.
So these were highly associated with spiritualism and like a spiritualist seance.
So it was something that if someone was taking part in a spiritualist seance, they could maybe anticipate something would happen. An Apport would happen during the seance.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it happened a lot. So it was everything from like, dimes and pennies and sometimes little objects that were meaningful to people. Spiritualist mediums could quite often appear to produce these things.
Yeah.
Trinkets. And they had to come from somewhere else. One of the things that's easy to get confused is apport and materialization. So those are two different things. Sometimes that's used interchangeably, but the truth of the matter is a materialization is something that was produced out of nothing.
Okay.
And an apport is something that comes from somewhere else. So it disappears from one place only to appear in another by supernatural means.
Okay, so it pops in.
Just pops in.
From somewhere else.
And then somewhere else. One of the things that our friend Tyler's always talking about when it comes to apports is, what if something apported out of the ocean? Is there just like a chunk of water missing?
Yeah.
Does the ocean get like an inch smaller?
Yeah, that's interesting.
The very first recorded account of an apport comes from a seance that happened in the early 19th century. It happened in Paris in 1819. At the seance were 3 somnambulists and a blind woman. I think the somnambulist is what they were calling mediums.
Okay.
And sometimes I think it's used interchangeably with like hypnotists, if I'm...
Interesting.
Because I think a lot of the time the early mediums were put under during hypnosis.
Somnambulism is sleepwalking, I think.
Oh,
so I think that would
okay.
kind of make sense with like a hypnotism,
neat.
as you're kind of sleepwalking in that trance state.
God,
so I think that's probably where that came from.
That's really cool.
They had the coolest terms for stuff back then.
Yeah.
We keep learning them during this podcast. One of the seeresses said she saw a dove flying around the room. It was carrying something in its beak, which it finally deposited before a person. When Billow examined the contents of the packet, he found 3 pieces of paper with a small bone glued to each, and beneath was written Saint Maxine, Saint Sabine, and many martyrs. That's weird. That's the first recorded account of an Apport, and it was delivering holy relics.
Weird.
Isn't that crazy?
That's cool, though.
That's relatively early because the spiritualist movement didn't really start till the later 1800s. But people were getting weird stuff. They probably thought, I know that one of the scientists that they showed it to was like, well, it's not ghosts, it's animal magnetism.
Okay.
Which is like, okay, whatever. They were really into animal magnetism back in the
Yeah.
day. So they thought that it was actually produced. I think animal magnetism was a word that they used for hypnosis.
I don't really know anything about it.
I think it was.
I just think it sounds hilarious.
So they probably thought that hypnosis manifested these things. They didn't even attach it to ghosts.
Yeah. I know that they were like very interested in the idea of like looking at spiritualism as if it were a spiritual science. So the idea was to kind of like take the superstition out of it.
Yeah.
They wanted it to be a spiritual science.
Where we get a lot of our stories of Apports comes from a weird place. The founder of Stanford University, his name was Leland. He and his wife lost their son Leland Jr. when he was just 15.
Okay.
They were on an overseas trip doing like archaeological tourism, as was popular with rich white guys back during that time period. And their son died, and they had a very difficult time with this. His brother, Leland's brother Thomas, was very into spiritualism. And he suggested that they start to attend some seances and maybe they could communicate with their son and receive some closure that way. Very, very common for that time period, mid to late 1800s. There's even rumors today that Leland started Stanford University because of those seances.
Wow.
They met a medium by the name of Maud Lord Drake at a seance in New York City that they attended with President Ulysses S. Grant.
Wow.
So they were all attending seances together. They went to a bunch of seances in Paris. It was a big deal for them.
Yeah.
Leland's brother, Thomas, at the same time, he had founded the Victorian Association of Progressive Spiritualists in Australia.
Okay.
And he held hundreds and hundreds of seances during this time period. He started to notice Apports. There were so many Apports that were happening that he starts to send them to Stanford University.
Wow. So he's experiencing so many of these Apports during his own research seances that he's basically just kind of funneling that information back home.
I want to read you a bit of an article here. This came out a few years ago in Stanford University's own magazine. They still have these Apports. Wow. They still have everything that he sent them.
I would love to see that.
It's just after 10 a.m. on February morning, and University archivist Maggie Kimball, 80, is running at full throttle. She's busy moving the Special Collections Department into its new home at Green Library, and the idea that a magazine article that might draw curiosity seekers to the Welton Apports clearly gives her pause. Nevertheless, she grabs the keys and heads for the room where the mysterious objects are stored. People think, oh my God, this is weird, Kimball says, but most archivists deal with oddities, whether it's somebody's false teeth, locks of hair, or bizarre things you find in their papers. Typically, she gets one call a year from someone asking to see the Welton Apports. Once, it was a student doing a project for history class. A couple years ago, it was a couple of modern-day spiritualists who placed their hands over the objects, apparently trying to get a sense of their auras. Most recently, it was a TV film crew. Kimball unlocks the storage room and goes to a book trolley loaded with 26 gray archival boxes, each tied with pink string. She pulls one out, opens it, and gingerly extracts an empty tortoise shell about the size of a tea saucer. The story is that when this materialized, the tortoise was still in it, Kimball says. It lived out the rest of its days in Thomas Welton's garden. Thomas Welton is his brother, Leland's brother. Other items in the boxes: a coconut husk adorned with seashells, children's slates with barely legible chalk scribblings, and pieces of Egyptian papyrus with faint hieroglyphics. A handwritten note on one identifies it as a message from the priests of Osiris, calling for sacrifice, quote, unto the exalted of the sun, Ramses.
Ew.
So there's, at Stanford University, one of the most well-respected universities in the world, There's a bunch of these
That's so cool.
spiritualist items.
Oh, I want to see them.
They include Box 1, seeds, arrowheads, shark teeth, pottery shards. Box 2 has slates with written messages on them, so spirit slates.
So these are you telling me that the slates appeared?
I think
or is the writing technically considered?
I think that the writing is
apporting?
considered apporting.
Well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, just
That's
kind of because
cool.
it showed up out of nowhere. You know, obviously there was chalk involved somewhere.
No, totally makes sense.
They had a human shoulder blade that appeared. Just randomly appeared during one of these seances.
Somebody's trying to get rid of body parts during a seance.
Maybe.
Hoist it onto the table when it's all dark.
The physical medium that was performing these apports, who was bringing these things in ostensibly from the other side.
Yeah.
His name was Charles Bailey.
Okay.
He was huge in Australia at that time. In 1890, he was noticed by Thomas Welton. And so it was actually Thomas Welton who helped bring this guy's stuff over to the United States.
Okay.
Well, in 1902, Bailey held a seance at Stanford's home and impressed him with abundant showers of metal that fell from the ceiling in the dark room. And for 12 years, he gave regular seances to Stanford. And they were documented and given to Stanford University, along with all of those apports, which make up the collection. Some of the other things, he produced small birds. So it wasn't just tortoises, it was small birds that were being produced. Here's the problem, though.
Oh, no. I know where you're going with this.
At one of Charles Bailey's seances, he stunned everybody because these birds just appeared and started flying around. Yeah. And then the guy that he had borrowed the birds from stood up in the audience.
Oh, no. You know what? This is literally, where did the lighter fluid come from?
It is.
Well, where did the lighter fluid come from?
But again, here you have this theme that keeps continuing. Every time we talk about spiritualism, whether it's the spirit slates, they're magicians.
Yeah.
A lot of these guys are magicians.
Yeah, I mean, if you want a deeper dive into spiritualism, absolutely watch the Spirit Slates episode, because we do a pretty good deep dive on the spiritualist movement. But you're right. I mean, what we're looking at is a lot of tricks of the trade for magicians, and most magicians would be able to spot it right away.
Fraudulent mediumship, they refer to it as.
Yes.
And it's sad because a lot of the people who were stunned by this.
Oh my God,
one of them
horrible.
being Stanford and his sister-in-law.
Yeah, I mean,
grieving their dead son.
You know, spiritualism at its peak, so many people all over the world were so wrapped up in it, and most of those people were grieving, and it's so sad. It's so terrible.
That story ends kind of sadly because Jane never feels like she ever gets to communicate with her son. She attended so many seances. There were a few where she reported light anomalies, but there was never a full manifestation.
Or Jane.
And she eventually says, these people are all frauds.
Yeah.
I want nothing to do with this. Her husband, Leland, he was done well before her. In fact, he tried to get their family lawyer to be like, hey,
we need to stop.
We got to figure this thing out. We got to stop all of this nonsense, because they were spending lots of time and money. Mm-hmm. She eventually says, it's all fraudulent. I don't want anything to do with it. There were a lot of other smart people who were into this stuff, though.
Yeah.
Charles Darwin and his partner were also into this stuff.
Yeah.
Alfred Russel Wallace, British naturalist and co-developer of the theory of natural selection with Charles Darwin, researched the emerging phenomenon of apports. Mm-hmm. He reported that one woman named Nicole was very good at apporting flowers. In one 1867 seance, she suddenly held 15 chrysanthemums that just appeared on the table.
That's cool.
Even today, there are some people who are very smart who are studying the Apport phenomenon. Mm-hmm. One of them is Stanley Krippner. We watched some of his videos talking about these different seances that he's attended where he has watched things apport.
Yeah, he's a parapsychologist.
He's a parapsychologist.
Mm-hmm.
He is a professor of psychology at Saybrook University, and he was the director of the Maimonides Medical Center and Dream Research Laboratory in Brooklyn.
Cool.
Some people might be familiar with his book Dream Telepathy, where they had some really cool scientific studies about dream telepathy.
I like both of those words.
It's got one of the coolest, old vintage covers, too.
That's awesome.
I think they just reissued it for, the 30th or 50th anniversary of the book.
Yeah.
It's really great. You should definitely check it out if you're interested at all in, telepathy.
Yeah.
Back in 1994, Krippner and his research team, many of which who were highly skeptical of paranormal phenomena, they traveled to Brazil to meet with Amyr Amiden, who was gaining a lot of traction in that area for being able to produce apports, things out of just thin air. He claims that he and his team observed over 90 objects appearing mid-air and dropping to the table right in front of them.
Fascinating.
They were included semi-precious stones, medallions, and even jewelry. This is a passage from the book Weird, Paranormal Tales of Apports and Manifestations. According to Krippner, there were stories of how one woman who met him was asked what she was looking for in Brazil but hadn't found it yet. She said, "I've been looking for an emerald. I've not found an emerald." Amiden told her to close her hand and put his hand over top of hers, and when she opened her hand, the emerald was there. Krippner stated that there was a second woman that he spoke to. He said, quote, "What are you looking for?" And she said, "Oh, I'd like a gold bracelet." So he took tin foil from little pads of butter and arranged them into a circular form, put them around her wrist, and right before her eyes, they turned into a gold bracelet.
This is like the best pickup ever.
Right?
This guy's manifesting jewelry out of nowhere for this woman.
Even this, though, that sounds like a magic trick. That sounds like street magic to me.
Yeah, it definitely does.
But Krippner's a very smart guy. He continued to research this stuff. Krippner writes, "Whenever I encounter a psychic claimant or a claimant medium having a background in magic, this goes through my mind. I think, how could a magician perform these feats? So, this is a deliberation I bring to me whenever I'm investigating what we call spontaneous cases. In many, I can figure out how a magician would perform those feats, those effects, which immediately put the effect of some type of suspicion on me. So, as Amiden was talking, a number of people were very skeptical and others were very open. On a walk to dinner, bright-colored stones kept falling out of nowhere at people's feet, and people were delighted, and they got to keep them. It's hard to figure out how a bright-colored stone could fall out of nowhere unless he was tossing them up in the air, which, of course, he wasn't. We could watch them, and a number of other things would happen spontaneously. Blood would appear in a chalice, or at least something that looked like blood would appear in a chalice. Strange markings would appear on people's doors. So people left Brazil with all sorts of experiences.
Weird.
That's f***ing creepy. Most interesting were religious medallions, which go back maybe 100 years with Latin inscriptions on them. Fortunately, I was able to photograph these because later they were stolen from my apartment. The design on the religious medallion had some connection to the person whose feet it landed. This is going to become a common theme. Pierre Roll focused on the ones that seemed to be written in Latin because he had a background in knowledge of Latin and was originally from Europe. The medallions that happened to me were more generic in nature in terms of showing Jesus Christ with a lamb, the symbology of a lamb, and Jesus sacrificing himself for the benefit of humankind. Even though Amyr was raised Muslim and not Christian, all of the medallions had some connection with Christianity.
Weird. And also, like, it reminds me of what you said earlier, which is like the things that are appearing are like hyper specific to that person.
Krippner returned with, quote, a college student who was very, very skeptical. Krippner thought that it was essential to have someone skeptical with him. So the Apports started happening again, and this skeptic was there with him to watch it all.
Okay.
This is what Krippner says. From time to time, he would say, "I think something's going to happen." And then immediately, Ruth called the physician on our team to take his pulse and take his pH reading because he had acid feelings in his mouth, like something was going to happen. That's kind of a weird thing. Like he started tasting like acid or metal in his mouth.
Weird.
And then immediately something would pop out of the air. Like he could taste the psychosphere.
Oh, we're getting a lot of pop culture references this one.
When we did the statistics, the acid reading was high, higher than average. It didn't reach statistical significance, but he was right when he said he tasted acid. He had an acid feeling. Again, the pulse and the heart rhythm were very irregular before and after the Apports would happen.
Interesting.
There was a Brazilian senator who came with his wife, and he told his wife about Amyr, and he asked, could Amyr produce something? Amyr said, well, it depends on the spirits, but I think the spirits like her. Then plunk, a ring came out of nowhere and fell to the floor. It fit her finger exactly, and she was very happy. She now had a souvenir from the spirit world, so to speak. Roberto Crema, who was a psychologist on our team, said to Amyr, "My daughter's having her 12th birthday and she's looking forward to a gift." "Well," he said, "it depends on the spirits. I can't do this myself." And then plunk, out of nowhere on the floor, came a little ring with 12 rhinestones in it, and it fit his daughter's finger perfectly, he told us the next day. The most common objects were colored stones. These are what we call milled stones. You take ordinary stones, you run them through a tumbler, and they come out looking like semi-precious stones.
Yeah.
Several dozens of these appeared. If they landed in front of a person, that person got to keep them. Once we got back home, I did the statistics, and we had an anomaly for each of these events that correlated significantly, interestingly enough, with the geomagnetic field. The higher the geomagnetic level, the more anomalous the experience. It was just the opposite of what we found in our dream tool under the experiments, that the lower the geometric field, the more likely telepathy was. Which is funny because that correlates to geomagnetic storms, which we talk about all the time.
Yeah.
About how, like, when there's geomagnetic storms, your dreams are up.
Yeah.
They don't, like, it's like you're not connected to the grid.
Yeah.
But they found that every time one of those apports would happen, it was when the geomagnetic field was a lot higher because they were measuring all that at the time. Pretty neat. Pretty cool. How often can a magician know what size ring your daughter's wearing? You know?
Yeah.
That's kind of strange.
Yeah.
It's weird. I wish Connor was here, but he's out gallivanting with his buddies.
I know. We really could have used him for this because he could have talked us through all the magic stuff.
I know. I want to ask him how he would perform an apport.
Yeah, we need the great Randini here.
He would...
the conjurer.
Huh. You recognize that number?
Mm-mm.
They just texted me a video.
Okay.
Let me, I'll screencast it. We can watch it together.
Brother Connor has spent too much time divulging in the secrets of the great and mysterious Brotherhood of Magicians.
For the Brotherhood,
Abracadabra! If you ever want to see your beloved producer, the Conjurer, again, he must agree to stop discussing tricks on this silly little Haunted Objects podcast, even in the name of discussing paranormal mysteries. The choice is both his and yours.
Guys, I can't get out.
Oh, he's at magic camp.
Yes.
Oh, that's why they've got his wrists all tied up and everything.
Yeah. He's practicing.
He's practicing how to escape
just
from
practicing.
bonds. Well, I'm glad he's having fun.
Yeah, good for him.
Well, we miss you, Connor. I know you're listening.
Hurry back soon, Connor.
This episode is brought to you by the Newkirk Museum of the Paranormal Membership Program. Become a museum member and take part in live paranormal investigations. Receive Dana's Magic of the Month subscription box, access in-depth artifact case files, and gain access to hundreds of hours of exclusive content available only to members. To become a member, visit patreon.com/paramuseum.
So it's almost like a lot of very smart people were proving to a lot of other smart people that they believed that there was something to the idea of apports.
Yeah.
Doesn't take too long before weird stuff like that makes its way to the military.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the military goes, how can we weaponize this?
Yeah.
It's time to return back to one of our favorite places, the
Yep.
Stanford Research Institute.
Oh, man. SRI.
Kit Green, Hal Putoff.
Oh, we got Putoff
Russell
and Green.
Targ.
Oh, Targ's there.
We talked a lot about the experiments that were happening there in
Yeah.
our Uri Geller episode. Guess what? We get to talk about Uri again.
Are those guys all in the weeds in this? Are they all over this?
It's funny that it keeps coming back to Stanford.
Yeah.
There's a lot of weird stuff happening at Stanford, and we're even seeing in this episode that the founding of Stanford has some weirdness to it too.
Yeah.
So they've been interested in this type of stuff for a long, long time.
Yeah, they've been at the forefront of it for a long time. And they've not really hidden the fact that they've been doing all of these things either.
Well, it's probably because the CIA is making them not be.
Oh boy.
The CIA was covertly funding a lot of the psychic experiments that were happening at SRI back in the 70s.
Yes, as we know.
As was, strangely enough, astronaut Edgar Mitchell.
Yeah.
The sixth man to walk on the moon. He got very strange after he came back and decided there's something to consciousness research. There's something to psychic research. We should be putting some time and money into this. And he did. He put his money where his mouth was.
It's very smart of him.
So he helped fund a lot of the stuff, which meant that he was hanging around SRI when Uri Geller was there.
Can you imagine?
The stories that are coming out of SRI, it sounds like it was the coolest fucking place to be in the 70s.
Jacques Vallée was there too.
Yes, he
Also
was.
hanging out there.
You think there's a modern equivalent of SRI right now?
Travel Channel.
No.
I hope not. I was going to say, like, they're trying to make Skinwalker Ranch that, but it's not. It just doesn't have that flavor because there's not enough, like, really, really smart people doing this.
I think it really goes in waves of sort of like that funding and that governmental sort of interest, because anything academic or scientific requires that funding up front or it doesn't happen at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this was a time period where there was money flying around.
Yeah.
Probably like that post 60s, you know, sort of like hippie new age era with money flying around, and a lot of that was funded. So there were a lot of smart people, government intrigue, and people would just kind of group to where the money was. And I think that we see little glimmers of that now.
I think you see it with To the Stars a little bit.
Yeah.
You see a little bit with like Skinwalker.
And I think that that's part of it. Skinwalkers had some of that funding, and then it sort of faded away or dried up or passed hands.
Yeah.
And then now it's sort of like, yeah, it's funding now, but it's like a TV show. So I think that there's like, you know, time periods of that money today, but it's a little less money. I think secrecy is a little bit higher too. So where there is money, we don't really know about it. It's all black bag, black ops.
Yeah. You know what? The Newkirk Museum should be the new SRI, which is why you should become a museum member at patreon.com/paramuseum. Help us build our lab.
Help us.
We literally are building cool shit. Like we're doing weird experiments and stuff all the time. We just need a couple mil.
I want Putov's eyebrows. That's my goal.
I think I'm probably going to have those before you do.
That's true.
Patreon.com/paramuseum. Help us become the new SRI.
Hire those guys?
Or CIA could covertly fund us, send us some money. We keep asking for it.
Are CIA going to join our Patreon?
They did comment on one of our videos.
They did. They did.
Well, at the SRI, at the Stanford Research Institute, Edgar Mitchell was hanging out in one of these labs.
So jealous.
And he had this to say. He gave an interview in 1974 to the Pacific Sun. And in it, he talked about one of the Apport experiences that he had while he was hanging out at the SRI lab. We were finishing lunch in the cafeteria at SRI, and Uri Geller was eating a dish of ice cream. Uri did a good job, so he got ice cream. Do you think his spoon just went?
Yeah, was he messing with his spoon?
He bit down on something in the ice cream, and it cut his mouth, so he was swearing at it. I fished it out of the ice cream, scraped it off, washed it off, and was surprised to see what it was. It was the ornament part of a tie clasp that I had lost in Houston 2 years before.
Oh my God.
Edgar was absolutely sure it was the same, adding, I had never been to the SRI building before, and Uri had never been to Houston.
But that's more of what you were talking about, like something that only you would go like, what the f*** is this about?
It's a consistent thing in Apports.
That's so weird.
About 30 minutes later, when we'd gone back to the lab, the clasp part of it fell to the floor behind Hal Puthoff. And about 30 minutes after that, as we were standing up in the laboratory, another tie pin showed up. I'd lost that in Houston at the same time as the other one.
So here's the thing, for argument's sake, Uri couldn't have even faked this because he would have had to have snuck into this guy's hotel room 2 years prior or wherever it was, stolen the tie clasps, held on to them for 2 years, hoped that this opportunity would have happened for him. That's so weird.
Sounds like some CIA shit to me.
I know. Well, listen, this comes back around to even some of the current stuff we were just talking about.
Okay.
Because in this book, Weird, Paranormal Tales of Apports and Manifestations, the author writes, I wrote Hal Puthoff to ask about this story and to see if the metal objects that he was testing for To the Stars Academy.
The
UFO parts, the metamaterials.
Yeah.
might be related to the Apport phenomenon he'd previously experienced at SRI.
Yeah.
It occurred to me that the tiny pieces of metal are more likely to be Apports, or purposefully provided by the intelligence instead of believing that pieces were falling off flying saucers.
So wait, say that again.
So the author believes that it makes more sense that whatever it was they were studying was purposefully provided by the intelligence and not something that fell off of a flying saucer.
Oh,
right?
Weird.
Because it's making something to push people somewhere to do something or to find something that's specific to what they're doing.
I'm scared.
That's a creepy thought.
That's a very Hellier-ish thought.
I know. It comes back around.
Strange.
We actually have a Hellier Apport story.
We do.
That we don't really ever talk about.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that in a minute.
That's weird. Thank you for that clarification.
Isn't that weird?
That is very weird.
But Puthoff didn't really have an answer. He said they'd analyze the materials and determine their components, and that's where he left it. The thing that's interesting to me, like that comment about Apports is very interesting because this whole time everyone's like, these are pieces of a UFO or a crashed UFO, right?
Yeah.
And when they study them, it's something that shouldn't exist. It's like a bunch of different metals that apparently shouldn't be together, but it's almost as if they're not from a UFO.
It's like
it's the phenomena itself going, well, you're looking for something that shouldn't exist, so I'm going to make something for you that doesn't exist, so you know you should be looking
or
in this direction.
Or just keep looking.
Or just, exactly!
Which is more sinister.
Is it sinister, or is it just like...
Maybe that's just me being paranoid.
You motherfuckers think you know everything these days. I'm going to show you that you don't.
Ooh, I don't know. I'm going to be thinking about that for a long time.
Right?
That's really weird.
Because if these objects appear to people with meaning behind them...
That means that, I mean, and you've got so many instances already just this episode.
But it's also like people are getting they're getting birthday presents from that one guy, rings that fit them perfectly. So like if there's a bunch of people sitting around going, man, I really wish we had UFO parts.
Yeah.
And then they appear.
Yeah, that's so weird. Oh my God.
I don't know.
Have they, I mean, you probably wouldn't know.
Makes me think of the coal.
Yeah.
What was the coal trying to get us to pay attention to?
Well, I mean, it definitely kept you coming back.
Since we're on the subject of Apports, and we just talked about one that happened to Uri at a laboratory that freaked everybody out, here's another good one. This other story that involves Uri comes from Andrija Puharic, who we talked about in a little bit. He's the guy who brought Uri to the United States, maybe working for the CIA, allegedly. He writes, during July 1975, I was exposed to a short but rapid sequence of teleportations while staying in the new Otani Hotel in Tokyo in the room next to Uri Geller. At about 10:20 p.m. one evening, after a press conference during which a miscalculation upset Geller, his secretary Trina and photographer Shippy departed to send a telex message. I left Geller in his room, unlocked the door to my room, and went in. Within a few seconds, I saw a small object fall to the floor, not from a great height, but within 1 foot of the drawn window curtains. It was a pair of nail clippers that did not belong to me. When I took it next door to Uri, he told me it belonged to him and would normally be kept zipped up in a leather case from which he showed me it was missing. I took Uri back to my room to show him where the nail clippers had fallen, but we got no further than opening my door when an explosion and crash occurred. Broken glass was found all over the area by the door and in the hotel corridor. One glass tumbler from my bathroom was now missing. One hotel guests in the corridor saw the flying glass but could offer no explanation. We cleaned up the broken glass. Uri returned it to his room and I to mine. Almost immediately, I saw the sudden appearance of a magnifying lens in the middle of the floor on the carpet. Previously, it had been on the desk more than 6 feet away. All this had taken only 3 to 4 minutes. What is that all about?
I don't know. It like almost feels like it's part of like it's something that happens in the physical environment when that energy is being raised or when that energy is cycling properly. Like it's just shit's just popping around all over the place.
Also in 1974, John Lennon experienced an Apport. And this is according to Uri Geller. So John had had a UFO sighting that same time. He kind of talked about that a few times.
Okay.
Fairly famous, common knowledge. This one is not. According to Geller, John had gotten up at his hotel in the middle of the night and he saw light coming from under the door. Thinking there might be a fire, he tried to wake Yoko Ono but could not. When he opened the door, he encountered bug-like creatures. He attempted to attack them, but they mentally held him back. All of a sudden, John Lennon is awake, as if he had had a dream, but he's holding a bronze egg-type object in his hand. He told Ono what had occurred, and she believed him. Later, according to Geller, he was having coffee with Lennon at a nearby restaurant, and Lennon handed him the object and said, "This might be my ticket to another planet, but I don't want it."
Whoa.
Geller has had the object on him ever since,
Yeah.
and he's never had it analyzed.
I want to touch that egg.
I do too.
Of John Lennon's egg,
Do you
alien
think?
egg.
Do you think Uri would let us touch that egg?
Nope.
Hold it in our hand.
I don't know if he's ever let anyone touch it.
We're basically best friends with him now.
Yeah. Do you think that John Lennon got visited by the CIA?
I think he might. I think he might have.
Right?
I can't help but think about that all the time.
Yeah.
I'm gonna touch that egg. I'm gonna touch that egg. Uri listened to the podcast and shared
He
the
did.
podcast.
It was very cool.
And then he sent me his phone number.
Oh
Which
my God.
I have not used yet. I have not used his phone
you don't
number.
want to like that's a special thing.
But I'm going to ask him if I can touch that egg. I want to touch that fucking egg.
I don't really like the Beatles. Sorry, Beatles fans. I know you're probably gonna hate me forever, but I did not know that John Lennon had an alien encounter experience. I had never heard of this story before, so that's pretty interesting that they were like bug-like creatures.
It's common. All these stories, they have so much stuff in common.
Yeah.
There is a file that was declassified that comes from DARPA. It was a RAND think tank for the Advanced Research Projects Agency, eventually known as DARPA. This is from 1973, and it's titled A Working Note Prepared for the Advanced Research Projects Agency on Paranormal Phenomena, a Briefing and a Net Assessment Study. It says, in this briefing, our major concern is with paranormal phenomena that meet two criteria. They have the potential for military applications in the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
And two, they are the subject of experimental investigation from the beginning. Soviet researchers have tended to concentrate on experimental subjects that appear to display outstanding abilities. It's clear, however, that the Russians believe that subjects can be trained for certain types of skills, notably telepathy and psychokinesis. It would not be conceptually difficult, for example, to imagine the utility of psychokinesis, if feasible, in disrupting the electrical systems associated with an ICBM's guidance program.
Yeah.
So they're already like thinking...
Psychic spies immediately.
Psychic spies.
Yeah.
We can use their telekinesis to disrupt missiles.
Yeah.
So that's where they're going. But they also studied Apports.
I mean, I'm not shocked.
Welk claims, based on many Soviet sources, that the so-called Apport technique is likely to meet valuable intelligence needs. When fully developed, this technique would make possible the abduction of actual objects, including documents, in enemy territory and their transfer to friendly territory. Objects so abducted are known as Apports. They could be returned to the point of origin without the enemy becoming aware of this temporary abduction.
I mean, the thing they're also not saying there is not only that, but you could plant.
Oh,
things,
yes.
You know?
Wow, you could frame people for stuff.
Yeah.
There was a report done for the CIA and the DIA, and part of the assessment was actually on James Randi, our favorite skeptic.
Yeah.
It says, this magician, Mr. James Randi, claimed that the parapsychological researchers at an academic facility in St. Louis, Missouri were taken in by trickery and that most, if not all, parapsychological research is suspect. These claims are, in fact, gross distortions, since the researchers involved never stated they had made observations of psychic abilities in formal experiments. Thus, it is apparent that Mr. Randi has presented an extremely one-sided view of this hoax attempt. He even claims that all of the parapsychological research is of questionable value. Most TV and press coverage thus far also reflect these views. As a result, the public is given highly biased perspectives of this research area in general. It's clear that Mr. Randi is solely interested in promoting his image as a clever magician and in enhancing his career as a showman at the expense of reporting accuracy. So literally the government is making fun of James Randi in official documents.
The government is like, this guy sucks. can get this guy out of here.
I want everyone to know, too, that when we did the Uri Geller episode,
Yeah.
James Randi ended up being kind of a footnote to that one because everybody knows the rivalry. But Dana talked so much trash about James Randi, I had to cut most of it out because it turned into such a... It was very funny. I couldn't even say his name without Dana being like, that guy.
I don't give a shit about James Randi. Once again,
Clearly,
that guy.
neither does the DIA
Yeah.
or the CIA.
Same.
They didn't like him at all. Edgar Mitchell had a foundation for research into extraterrestrial and extraordinary experiences.
Badass.
He conducted a poll and found that 61% of UFO experiencers have observed apports and materializations. So it's very common, not just a spiritualist thing, but it's very common in all kinds of high strangeness cases.
All sorts of phenomena.
But
you
it's
would
all
say.
connected. I don't know why
Yeah.
more people don't realize that all this stuff is all related to each other.
I mean,
So-
are UFOs just apports?
It just adds credence to that idea that the paranormal itself is giving you what you ask for or what you need.
Yeah. It's mirroring it back to you.
What do you think the phenomena is trying to tell us when it gave us an apport at that cabin when we were shooting Hellier?
Apparently, it's a side effect of the larger whole because these things are all happening in clusters.
We've only really talked about this story a few times.
Yeah.
And even then, there's like not a ton to talk about with it. Karl, you probably remember it best because you're the one who goes through all the footage and everything, which funny enough, there's not even footage of this.
No.
But it's so weird.
That's why you don't see it really on Hellier because, as a documentarian, I like to illustrate our stories that we're telling with footage. And at that point in time, when we were shooting Hellier, I didn't really have any footage from this story. And I didn't want it to just be talking heads for too long. But in season 1, we were at that cabin in Jenkins, Kentucky. And I guess the other reason I didn't want to talk about it either was I didn't want to draw too much attention to the fact that I was a smoker back then.
That's true. We're blowing up your shit talking about this on the live streams.
It's all right. My parents know by now. So basically, like once in a while, Dane and I would go out on the porch, have a cigarette, and we had a little plastic soda bottle where we put our butts in because we didn't want to make a mess of this guy's nice Airbnb property.
Yeah.
This was after a night or two. The next morning, we took off to go look for David's house or whatever we were doing. And I think I at least had a cigarette there in that morning. I put it there, and I was aware of the fact that this butt bottle was sitting on the porch next to one of the pillars of the porch because I remember having the thought of whether or not I should like hide it behind that pillar if it was too outstanding,
Yeah, because that guy, he lived like right down the road,
His
and he had like a
son
bunch
did,
of
yeah.
cameras and stuff. So we, I think we were extra careful about
Yeah, we
making
didn't
sure we
wanna be
didn't leave
rude.
any. Yeah, we didn't want to be rude or
Yeah.
anything, or like leave cigarette butts out.
Yeah.
we took off. We spent our day in town. We did all that. We got back that evening. And when we got back, there was no butt bottle on the porch. And, at that point, again, we were aware that the owner would sort of drive past the property throughout the day. So we
Yeah.
figured he just saw it there on the porch and did some tidying up and grabbed it and took it.
Sure.
But what was weird about it was the next morning when we got into the car, this time I was going with you guys because I was going to film you guys a little bit while we were driving wherever we were going into town. And as I sat in the back seat of the car, the butt bottle was in the back seat, like in the footwell area. Of the
Oh, I
back
forgot.
seat.
Yeah, you were the one who noticed it.
Yeah, it was there in the car. And I was like, what the heck? And the best I could think, I asked Rashad, our second cameraman, later when we
May he rest in peace.
I hope the aliens give him back to us. I asked him later, I was like, dude, did you like grab this or something? Did you think that like we should keep using it throughout the day or something like that? And he's like, dude, what are you talking about? I didn't grab your friggin' cigarette butt bottle. Like,
It's so random.
yeah, this very nice guy.
Yeah.
Like, we
Yeah, he's
chatted
great.
with him for like an hour when we checked
He was
in
awesome.
about the whole area. He was the one that was telling us about caves and,
Yeah.
and weird prints and stuff. So this guy would have had to be so passive aggressively
Yeah.
annoyed that we were cleaning up after ourselves with keeping our butts in a bottle that he took it while we were gone during the day. And he came back after we were there at night.
Yeah.
And we stay up late. We were up that was probably the night that we were up until 3 a.m. talking
Oh,
to Steve
yeah,
about
yeah.
the IP addresses.
Yeah.
So he would have had to like come back after we were sleeping in the early hours of the dawn, try every door until he found one open and chuck it into our car? Like,
yeah, it's so...
The only rational explanation doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't make any sense at all.
One of the things that's kind of weird about it too, that always makes it stand out to me, was it was one of like kind of 2 or 3 kind of like stories that were just didn't really fit into the narrative, or we didn't have footage for it. And so we kept them to ourselves. But the rest of it was all on camera for the most part. And I remember reading a review of Hellier season 1 when it came out, and this always stood out to me. And I've saved it. I've got it here with me. So this was a review of Hellier season 1 posted on the website called Diagonal 22. And it was posted by someone using the screen name of Thunder Noggin. It was a very nice review, but he had this paragraph where he mentions, speaking of which, I'd be curious to see where season 2 of Hellier winds up. I say that because I'm curious to see if electronic disturbances start to become a problem, or if the cast start to experience weird anomalies or inconsistencies in their surrounding environment, missing items, manifestations, or subtle things being a little off or not how they remember them. This guy here is literally calling out, like, I wonder when Apports are going to start happening to the team. And they were happening.
They were already happening.
Already.
Yeah. It's so weird.
As Greenfield would say, it adds to the credential.
It adds to the credential. I mean, even from talking from the beginning, we've had personal encounters with Apports. I have one that I experience semi-regularly.
Yeah.
It's a story for another time, but my friends and I tried to perform an exorcism that we printed off the internet once years ago, and it everybody up for so long that to this day, every once in a while, there will be a rusty nail that will apport somewhere in my vicinity.
Yeah.
I've had them like fall out of my hair. I've had one time there was one, and they're a lot of the times when I find them, they're sticking straight up. So they're like on the head of it and they're sticking straight up.
I've seen it happen.
There was one that fell off of the top of a ceiling fan in the old apartment.
Yeah.
We haven't had any of that stuff happen here yet.
I found one in your shoe once.
In the shoe. Sometimes I find them in my pockets. One time there was one, I walked outside into the driveway, and right on the front of our door, it was just sitting straight up on its head, pointing straight up.
Dumb.
But there was other up shit that happened, everybody. Typically, it seemed to happen in like 3-year cycles or so. And we haven't had one since we moved here. So I don't know. But every once in a while, I'll hear tink, 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 and I'll look over and there's a rusty nail.
Like from a framework element, when we start talking about the idea of whether it's ghosts manifesting into our physical realm, whether we're talking about UFOs manifesting into this realm, if that's how they work, even just kind of like going back to the Hellier background, which for me has influenced a lot of the ways that I look at these, we're looking at like reality transforming or reality shifting type activity.
Massive.
Massive, like,
implications are scary.
Yes. Just that spiritual physical world dynamic, at this root level of, even then when you go into that idea of sort of reflection of just kind of like the phenomenon is reflecting what the people who join the case are into at that moment. So there's a very sort of like fabric of reality nature to a lot of this stuff that feels like this is, and it's part of why I'm surprised it's not more common as a story, because it feels very reflective of the sort of like roots of paranormal investigation in all forms, where it's this sort of reflective manifesting idea of something coming seemingly out of nowhere into this physical space.
Yeah. In everything that I've read about this, and there's very little. There's not a whole, we were talking, there's not much stuff on Apports.
No, there really, I looked, and there are people talking about it, but there's so few, and it's kind of all over the place.
Next to nothing.
Yeah.
And when it is discussed, it's usually like a footnote in something bigger.
That's what I was coming up against.
So there's a couple different ways of looking at this, because a lot of the time it just happens spontaneously. But then you see stuff like Stanley Krippner going to this place with his researchers, and his researchers are asking for things to be manifested, and then they do.
Yeah.
And then you have people who, like, there's not a medium involved in it.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's almost their own desire that manifests this stuff.
Wow.
And I think that, like Karl said earlier, what if that's the way that UFOs are working? What if that's the way Bigfoot's working? What if certain people are able to access that part of themselves that can manifest those things into their reality?
Yeah.
A guy by the name of Nick Whitham, he is the trustee of the Banyan Retreat in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
The Banyan Retreat is kind of like they do a lot of spiritualist mediumship stuff.
Okay.
It's like a day retreat, same kind of way we'd think of like Lilydale over here or Casadega, which we've gone to numerous times.
Yeah.
Nick has this to say about Apports.
Okay.
I was very fortunate to be present in the very first time that we received an Apport through Scott Milligan's mediumship, and it happened first of all in the home circle. There were 2 coins apported for 2 of the circle members. The very first public seance we had 2 gentlemen visiting from Canada, and the spirit world wanted to give them an Apport. So midway through the sitting, they announced that they were going to attempt to try and bring something for these people. When they did, it was a coin, and the significance was the date of the coin. The 2 gentlemen were born 2 years apart from each other, and the date of the coin was dated the single year in between. If you have a look at Scott's website sometime, there's a list of all the Apports, and each one of them has significance to the person. They are very good reasons why the particular item is chosen for that individual. So from the perspective of a spiritualist medium, these things are all very specific to the person that they're being given to.
Yeah.
Another example of an Apport that was gifted was a figurine of a man leaning against a lamp post. The father, who was on the other side, sent it to his daughter in the seance circle, and its significance was that he used to call her Lampy.
I'm sitting here listening to everything that you're saying, and I cannot help but think this would be so easy to fake.
Yeah, for sure.
It's so easy to fake. But
For sure.
there are these instances of it being either so specific or people don't know, like the physical medium doesn't know that like innate detail about that person. And it feels as if there's like a trickster element to it where it's like, this would be so fucking easy to fake. Like anybody could fake something like this. All you'd have to be is like, is this person distracted enough for me to lob this thing over or put it in a spot where if I bump the table perfectly, it'll fall down on. But they're so hyper specific to that person that there is a trickstery element to it. And it's very interesting.
You're nailing exactly what I was going to say about this stuff. Is it's very easy to look at it and be like, wow, these are magician's tricks. Or sometimes they're just not even magician's tricks. It's just like rudimentary, like throwing something.
Yeah.
And then somebody else is like, whoa, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
This, though, seems part and parcel to high strangeness, to the phenomena.
It does.
Again, trickster in the paranormal.
Yeah.
It is almost as if the fraudulence can act as that lubricant for the real phenomena to manifest.
Yeah.
And so it could be like, okay, here's a magician's trick. There's that coin.
Yeah.
But even the magician is like unaware that coin holds a very specific significance to that person because things have been arranged in such a way where it's just that's what was supposed to happen for that person to get that message.
It's us.
Maybe the delivery of it wasn't above board, but the phenomena itself and the message exists. It's still there.
Yeah, I was going to say it's our obsession with things happening in a linear fashion.
I know.
Instead of looking at it, it's taking a step back and looking top down at it. We're so obsessed with being in the moment of these experiences that we might miss the reality, which is that thing is actually, even if there was some fraudulence, even if there, like you said, if there was a magician doing something, the symbology of the object itself is so intensely emotional for the person. And maybe the magician had no idea, just chose it because it was small and easy to, it's just, it's one of those things that I feel like even if there weren't magicians involved in half of these instances that you're talking about, I think that element of the trickster is so fascinating because it always puts the experiencer in an awkward position where they have to defend themselves.
I know.
And it's sort of like it never lets you just have a thing. It never just lets you. It's
but it
like,
can't.
no, you're going to struggle. You're going to be marginalized. You're going to be in an uncomfortable
But what
position.
if that's the point, though?
Yeah, I feel like it is an element of it.
So many of those types of stories, like we talk about how you manifest your own hauntings sometimes. A lot of the haunted objects that we have in the collection are just whatever. They don't really do anything for us. But when they do, it does something that's very specific to us. It's something that's meaningful to us. And some of the meaningful things that happen to other people with their like porcelain clown or their like Hot Topic dragon incense holder is specific to them, not to us. And so it never does anything to us.
Yeah.
It's almost as if the phenomena, it can't really manifest physically here to move things around.
Yeah.
So it has to influence people to move things around for it to be in the right place at the right time. And a lot of the time, the people that are willing to do that are tricksters themselves.
Euphonauts.
I look at this. Do you know how many times we've all accused one another of throwing these things?
Sure. I
in
mean,
that
you're
cemetery?
teenage boys too. Like,
Of
there's
course.
no way that you weren't all going, you're the one throwing it.
Yeah, we weren't f***ing parapsychologists.
No.
I didn't take this shit as seriously back then as I do these days. It could have been anybody. Maybe it's one of the GHI guys hasn't copped to it, but it still like had such a significance that I held on to it for that long.
Yeah.
You want to hear the end of my ghost story?
Yeah.
When I was about 18, my family all moved to Florida, and they asked if I wanted to go with them, and I said, no f***ing way. So my parents were about ready to head to Florida in like a day or two. My little sister, Katie, she was like, you have never taken me ghost hunting. I've always asked you to take me ghost hunting. You've never taken me. And I was like, well, this is your last opportunity. If you want to go, let's go. And she's like, can I bring, my boyfriend and one of his friends? And I said, yeah, but I don't want to drive. You guys drive. I'm not taking any equipment. We'll take flashlights, but that's it. I don't want it to be a whole thing, but I'll take you ghost hunting. I'll show you Barclay Cemetery because that's where they wanted to go. They're already scared on the drive in because it's terrifying. It's never not scary. We get up there. It's probably around the same time, midnight, 1 a.m, something like that. Again, nobody around, nothing. I'm telling them the story about the murderer the whole time we're going up. And so they're all scared. And I'm doing my best to like just stoke them, get them so freaked out. We get up there. They could barely walk 100 yards into the cemetery because it was so scary. They're huddled together, like in the middle of the cemetery. They're huddled together, like looking around. And we start to hear little kids laughing. It was a common thing up there. We'd hear it all the time. They start to hear little kids laughing from the far end of the cemetery. I look straight ahead and a bit to the right where the remains of an old church were. And I see a dude standing there. I thought he was a hunter. There's a guy who's dressed like a hunter, completely modern. He's wearing like overalls. He's got a bushy red beard. And I was like, oh shit, I got to yell at this guy and let him know that we're here. Because if he's like a hunter, because again, that's the only people who are up there. If he's a hunter, I don't want him to like freak out and like shoot in our direction or anything. And so I go, hey man. And he turns and he looks at me, makes perfect eye contact with me. Like I could see the guy. And then he just walks into the woods. And I went, that's weird. He didn't make any noise when he walked through the brush. He made zero noise whatsoever. My sister and her friends, they don't even see this guy. And I'm like, I think we should go. I don't know what's going on up here, but it unsettled me because on one hand, I'm like, that wasn't a ghost. He didn't look like a miner.
Yeah.
He didn't have like a fucking mining hat on and a pickaxe. He looked like some guy who's a hunter up here. And it freaked me out because I was like, there's never anybody up here. I'm thinking of the murderer that we encountered when we were kids. And I was like, we should go. We got to get the out of here. So we got in the car and we left. They had the time of their lives. They got what they wanted. And I'm like, was that guy a ghost? Did I see a ghost? He didn't make any noise. 10 years later, Dane and I, we're doing an event with our friend Jason Gowan. One of my he's been on the show before. He's in a lot of my stories from my youth. We're doing an event with him and we're like talking about Barclay Cemetery. And every time I go back to my hometown, we meet up and we go to all the places we used to go and reminisce. I told him this story because I'd never told him this story before. He's like, hang on a second. And he like texts somebody and 5 minutes go by and he goes, did he look like this? And he shows me a picture and it's the fucking guy that I saw up there. And I went, who is that? And he goes, that's Ed Bond, the guy whose body was dumped up there.
Yeah.
I saw that fucking guy. It wasn't a fucking ghost kid.
No.
It wasn't a fucking ghost miner.
No.
It was the guy whose killer we encountered on that road
Yeah.
20 some years before.
It was very eerie because I was with you when you saw the photo, and I've heard you tell this story so many times, and just I've heard the description of this ghost that you saw so many times, and the picture that Gowan showed us is like dead on.
Gowan was,
every aspect of it is absolutely 100%.
Jason was friends with his niece,
Yeah.
and so he texted and he was like, "Do you have any photos of your uncle around?" And
Wow.
he took a picture. Sure enough, that's who I saw. That's why he wasn't out of time.
Yeah.
Is that, though, what this was about?
Yeah.
What this piece of coal was? Was it like Ed Bond trying to get us to go and see his body, to find his body so that his murder was solved? I don't know.
I don't know.
But I do know one thing. That's why this piece of coal is a haunted object.
The Haunted Objects podcast is hosted by Greg and Dana Newkirk, produced by Connor J. Randall, with photography directed by Karl Pfeiffer, and features exclusive artifacts from the Newkirk Museum of the Paranormal. To learn more about the artifacts featured in this episode, take part in live interactive experiments, and enjoy exclusive Haunted Objects content, become a museum member at patreon.com/paramuseum. This has been a Planet Weird production.
If you ever want to see your beloved producer, the Conjurer, again, he must agree to stop discussing tricks on the Silly Haunted Objects podcast, even in the name of explaining paranormal mysteries. Either that, or you give us all of your spiritualism equipment and bent spoons. The choice is yours. And his. What the hell?